So I was out fitting the screws for this, I got started putting the pillars in this, one of the other episodes I mentioned how I inherited this crooked old stock. I'm going to go out and chamber it in something called, oh, it's going to be brand new. I'm calling it the 338 Hellbringer. Running a 325 or actually a 338 WSM reamer in. So we're going to do something to compete with the Edge style cartridges. Should actually be quite a bit hotter than the Edge or similar. Doesn't matter. The point is, I realized as I was doing this, I'm fitting this the screws. I've got some pretty good input as far as how to fit screws. Up here, kind of hard to read. Maybe I can run the camera up there quick. That whole shelf up there, you'll see right there in the middle there's a box marked grind, chop, trim, excise, mutilate. What that's code for is that that's a box of chop saws, cut-off saws, a bunch of different stuff, just for the sole purpose of, get some light here, cutting off and fitting action screws. I've posted on the inner tube about the subject before. I've tried all kinds of different ways, and I think I might have finally come up with the way that I find to be the best. So, I figured I'd share that with you. We start by milling these off until we get the protrusion that we want. This doesn't fit very well. This stock was cobbled together for a Remington action. It had some issues, and I've decided to stiffen it up by putting this. This is a PTG Oberndorf style. This section, this assembly right here makes it Oberndorf, which is smooth, sleek, doesn't hook on stuff. I'm going to put a heavy barrel on this so the carry point will be far enough forward that hopefully we can turn it into something useful, even though it's going to have that big stupid magazine hanging down. Not that it's going to have to be, it's just going to be because that's the way the gun is designed. So, what I have found, common way to do these, you take it, in this case, this particular comes with square bottomed holes in it. Drop a screw into there, flip it over, and you see that it protrudes a long ways. We want to take a wild guesstimate at the protrusion being down in here somewhere, so it just comes into the action. So this is how you get your initial look. So now we know that we want to grind this screw down. Now I buy boxes and buckets of these screws, and there's a few things I've learned to just buy oversized and cut them down, because I have to play with this relationship, and I've already done that on this one. I've already set this to where I want it, and I've set an action to where I want it, and I've cycled it, ka-dink, 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 ka-dink. I have found that it feeds and it cycles, and it doesn't look perfectly attractive because there's a but it's just the stock is shaped funny. What can I do? So I'll make it look good, but the biggest thing is there's two things you have to be aware of. That's the angle between this and the rifle action, and the distance between this. As you can see, this plane and this plane are angled to each other. Generally speaking, this wants to be parallel to the action, and then there's the question of how far apart do we want them to get the pickup and the feeding to work perfectly. This one is right now designed, so now it's time to cut the action screws for it. And as I was cutting and fitting these action screws out in the cold shop, I went, you know what? I'm going to give you a little tutelage on how I do it. One of the screws that I found in my bucket of screws that was about the right length, that actually went in and threaded and worked, has got a Torx head on it. I don't want this. I don't like this. I don't want to put Torx heads in this. I want to instead use Allen head screws. So, take this Torx, throw it over here. Don't want it. All I used it for was as a gauge. I found a screw that was roughly the right length. So, well, you know what? I'll go back and get it because I'll show you what I actually do. Now, I take one of these. Let's see if that focus needs to move at all. Yeah, we'll go with that. I like that a little better. We take this big long screw here, and this is where the key is. Now understand, that box that I showed you up above my head has got little miniature chop saws, it's got grinding wheels, it's got all sorts of grinding and polishing and cutting. It's got a little miniature, not a miniature belt sander, but a miniature rotary feed through. I do use a belt sander. I've gone through all these different iterations, but I want to go out and quickly shorten that screw up. I don't want to dink around with, you know. So what I've learned, the quickest, baddest, fastest way to do it, after trying everything that I can, is simply to cram it up against the grinder and just melt that thing off on the big coarse grinding wheel. I can melt this off in 30 seconds. Now I stop short enough that I quench it good, and then I spin it against the grinding wheel and I knock that slag off. I knock that ring off, get into fresh material. That takes another 10 or 15, 20 seconds. But here's the key. This is the important part. To make this work, you have a series, a handful. Out of my grinder, I've got a handful of 1/4-28 nuts. Oh, this one's going on tight. That's kind of weird. I bring these together, and without showing you the whole apparatus, out at my grinder I've got a pile of these nuts, and I've got two little miniature screwdrivers. Miniature, I don't know what you'd want to call these. This is a Vice Grip brand. We call them water pump pliers. You can call them right angle pliers. You can call them, you get into, they come in all different sizes up to and including. The name slips me right now, but I've got a couple of these little sets of nipped over different brands, because I tried different things, pliers. Now you bring this down to the length that you want, and the way I gauge it is I take this one here that was about right, and I knew that I wanted to get a few threads longer, and I don't like this rounded off end that exists on this one. I want to bring it out square. So I lay this alongside like this, and then I adjust these down till I get really close to the length that I want. Then I take my little right angle water pump pliers, or whatever they are, adjustable pliers, tighten this down nicely. Now I can either hold this in the pliers and I can run it up against it, or I can use my fingers. In most cases, I can use my fingers behind these nuts, burn in until my fingers get hot, quench. Burn until my fingers get hot, quench. If you're wearing a glove, you just keep your eye on it and make sure that you're not burning up into the usable threads. Just melt the end of this thing off, spin it off. Now, you're about this far away from, just a little ways away from the screws at this point. Or the nuts, I should say. You've got it all cleaned up. Now you quench it good. I have a bucket of water right there. And you start spinning it in, spinning it in, spinning it in, and you run this back to exactly where you want it. You know, probably stop a thread or so short from here. This one's been ground on quite a bit, as you can see. I've actually run right up to it. But here's why the nuts are actually on there. The reason is, no matter how careful you are with a grinder, it boogers up the ends of those. When you get done, you spin it, you dress it, you spin it, you dress it. But then you grab this guy, which, by the way, I'll a lot of times use for spinning and clean up and whatever, like this up against the grinder, okay? But you pull this off, and as it comes out, it irons those threads back out. It irons out. The cut end is what you left it at. It's, you know, it's ratted off, whatever. But as you pull that nut back off of there, as you take it back off using this assembly here, you might want to just take off one of the nuts. As it irons back off, you can work it and work it, loosen this all up, make sure it goes. Then you spin this nut right off of here, get it back to here, run it up against the wire wheel. My grinder's got a grinder on one side, a wire wheel on the other side. Run up against there, peel that thing, and it'll set a little ridge around here. Then you spin the nut back on, and you just work it. You work it on and off. Get this thing so that it threads perfectly. You're pulling direction out here, pulling out like this. When you get it just spinning, now, in the end, you get a square cut so that you get maximum engagement into your action. You get the end dressed to however you'd like. Like on my rear tang, I'll run this up against the belt sander and just polish it off nicely and maybe, you know, touch it with some bluing or whatever. Can make this look really pretty. But the trick is to get full threads all the way to the end, but get this popped out to where that last thread catches perfectly so that when you're going in, there's no fear of cross threading. You get a nice, clean, tidy, and the trick here, the absolute answer to the whole conundrum, is to have these doubled nuts on here. You can put 2 nuts on. The main reason to double them is so you can lock them with a couple of these vice grips. Now you got something that just flat doesn't move. You can grind right up to it. So you grind, you set to length, then you take your little pliers and you pop them loose. You spin this off, work it, work it, work it. You know, clean that up. Sometimes I'll even keep these 2 nuts locked together fairly tightly. If I've got one that's fighting me a little bit, I'll jam these nuts just a little. Get them pushed against each other. Now you can run this in. Now you can take your little knife type pliers, run them on here, and now you can really work this thing with the, as it's being held in the pliers. You can get a hold of it like this with a set of these pliers. And now you can really, I got them both. You want to grab both nuts, but you can run this and you can achieve any tightness you want. You can get one thread backed forward or one forward and one back. You can give yourself a sizing operation that will iron those threads. Now when this thing comes back out of here, it will easily thread back on. Everybody who's ever shortened an action screw goes up there as careful as they can, and they end up trying to put the nut back on and it doesn't go back on. They're like, oh man. So you run up against the wire wheel and you try to peel that thread back out of there. Then you go over to the belt sander and you spin it up like this and you taper. You end up tapering this end back like you didn't want to. It's not what you're looking for. So instead, absolutely, when you're going to shorten a bolt, the very first thing that you do is take a, as you can see, this one's been used quite a few times. It's actually rounded on this side. I don't know how many I've shortened with this, but it just spins on there. I've made these, and now I'm going out. I decided that this is one of the 5 builds I'm going to do in this series, and this has some things that'll weigh into the rest of the series. So I'm out in the cold, out in the shop, throwing together another barrel for this thing. I've got a Bart line with an 1'350" shank so that I can show my tightening procedures again. I hate to burn up a Bart line on this nice hunting gun. You know, that's all it's going to be is a hunting gun. But it is what it is. I could use it for a competition, but I don't have any need for any 338 stuff. So we're putting this 9.3 twist Bart line on this blown out 338. We're going to make a monster humdinger out of it, and we're going to use this PTG chassis. I'm going to rough it all up. I'm going to glue it forevermore in here. It's going to hook to these columns. So we're going to end up with the chassis glued, bearing and embedded to the columns. Then on the top side, we'll suck down to it, and we're going to bed this one full length. We're going to use both of the screws to hold everything together. And when that barrel is trying to rip itself out of this stock, as I've told you in some of my other things, it's going to transfer nicely to here. Hopefully we'll get a good repeatable system here. I'll see if I can make a really big 338 RUM plus. It's going to have a 35-degree shoulder angle, going to be slightly lengthened, it's going to be blown out a lot bigger, it's going to be about, oh man, probably 10 grains more capacity than the 338 RUM. Remington Ultra Mag. So it's going to be a big humper pumper, and that's going to put a lot of stresses on this. Hopefully this stock holds up. It's an unknown brand to me. But the reason I do this is to try to pass on things that I've learned that I found effective. And this is one that I found effective. Being able to quickly and easily shorten action screws, customize. What I find is I have 20 projects going, and I keep my screws sorted, but I drop one, I lose one. Just a couple days ago I dropped one in my wastebasket. Emptied the whole thing, didn't find it. Complete waste, gunk on my hands, epoxy. Anyway, when you can make them quickly and easily, it makes your life a lot easier. I buy these screws, by the bucket and by the bag, because I go through a lot of them, and for some reason I do a lot of them in this square shoulder. I guess that's probably because a lot of the new funky, goofy bottom metal comes with it. I've also got boxes of the tapered head, 90-degree heads too. But that aside, just wanted to throw this out here and say no matter what kind of a screw you're using, the absolute trick is to thread 2 nuts on first. Get them down onto the and this includes cutting off all thread. I use this method all the time. Pretty much any time I ever cut off a bolt anymore, I make sure I run 2 nuts down ahead of time. You can cut it off with a sawzall, you can cut it off with a hacksaw, you can cut something off however you'd like. And when you pull the screws back off, or the nuts back off of there, it dresses that end up, and you end up with a nice, usable, cut to length screw that starts into the action easily and gently without any fear of cross threading on your $1,000 Atlas action. So that's it for this one today, folks. Gonna go back out and chamber me up a barrel.